So a situation that we may end up with is two triangles that essentially overlap each other, which means they might share a side, they might share an angle. So if we can recognize their common side or their common angle, we can use that to figure out whether the triangles are congruent or not. Okay, so the first thing that we want to be able to do is to look at a little bit more complicated drawing and identify if two triangles have any common parts, sides, or angles, and then what they are. Looking at this figure, what do triangle ACD and ECB have in common? Yes, sir. They both have angle C. So, one thing that may help you is to highlight the different triangles. Okay, I do have colored pencils. Oh, those are markers. I do have colored pencils that you can kind of trace out the two triangles. Okay, so you can kind of see where they are. Another thing that might help is to separate them. So we'd have triangle ACD and triangle ECB. And what they have in common is that angle right there. So what angle do they share? What do they have in common would be angle C. So in this chapter, really, one of the goals is to be able to write a proof, a geometric proof, and being able to work from what you're given to what you want to prove using all of the theorems that we've talked about. Okay. So in this example, we're given this figure here that we have multiple triangles drawn in there, right? We're given that angle ZXW is congruent to angle YWX. So that's this guy right here and this guy right here. We're also given that ZWX is congruent to YXW. And what we want to prove is that ZW is congruent to YX. Okay. So, since we want to prove that ZW is congruent to YX, in order to do that, from what we've talked about in this chapter, we need to show that two triangles are congruent somewhere in this picture. If we look at what we're given, so we're given this angle congruent to another little angle, and then a bigger angle. So essentially we're forming that triangle, which has YX in it. and this triangle, which has ZW. Now, you may find it helpful to kind of visualize by taking these triangles essentially apart. So I have this triangle, which is WZX, and this is WYX. And my given information is that these two little angles right here are congruent, and that these two bigger angles right here are congruent. Okay. Now, these two triangles overlap each other, which means they are going to have something in common. What do they have in common? What do they share? What do they both have that's going to help us in this problem? What's that? Okay, they have congruent angles. What else? When we trace these triangles, what did we trace that they both have in common? So I only have yellow, but right here, what happens? I have yellow and green. So what do they have in common? Where did we trace? Exactly the same thing. We traced do they not both have the exact same bottom piece? Okay, they share that bottom side. So they share that bottom side, which means WX is congruent to itself, right? Just like two triangles that are sitting on top of each other that share a side. These are just sharing a side on the bottom. So if we look at these two triangles that have the same WX in them, are these two triangles congruent? Which of our 5 theorems tells me these two triangles are congruent? What do I have? Angle, side, angle. Is that a theorem that we can use? Absolutely. So the triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. And then we can say that ZW has to equal YX by CPCTC. So that's kind of the outline of what we're looking at. Now we just have to write it. So statements, reasons. We always start with given, right? Angle ZXW congruent to angle YWX. Angle ZWX congruent to angle YXW. If you have room and you want to write that all on one line going across, that's fine. You don't have to separate these two into 2 separate lines. So we write down our given information. Then we're going to write down any information that we can imply from the diagram, which in this case was that they share side WX. Reflexive property of congruence. So we have the angles congruent to each other. We have the side congruent to each other, or to itself. So now we're going to say that the two triangles, so pick a order to do the first triangle letters in. So I'm going to do ZWX. So on the second triangle, I would go, since I went ZWX, I'm going to go YXW. Because W is congruent to X. W has two blue lines and X has two blue lines. So Z corresponds with Y. W has the two blue lines. X has the two blue lines. So X has to go next. And X has the one red mark, so W goes last. And we said that that will be true because angle, side, angle. And lastly, ZW has to be congruent to YX, and I'm pulling that right from right there, because corresponding parts of congruent triangles have to be congruent.